Welcome to As Loud as I Want, a podcast that reflects our experiences through the COVID-19 pandemic as young women in rural Columbus County, North Carolina. From Buckhead to Bolton to Whiteville, and places in between, we use spoken word and sound to share what we've been feeling, seeing, and hearing in our communities. This podcast was created by a series of workshops where we learned about poetry and the arts of sound. As we wrap up our series, we want to reflect on what we learned as we created our audio pieces. For one, we learned more about poetry and spoken word.
And I actually learned about more than I thought I would, about how poems are wrote and they're more like consider like related to life things and what people go through, and there's different types. It's not just one thing or one definition to a poem. There's no poem that has to be the same. They're all different. Poems, I actually didn't really know what a poem was. I thought it was just rhymes, and I actually learned that it was more than rhymes in it.
We learned how we can use spoken word as a tool to express ourselves.
I learned that poetry, you can express your feeling, that you don't have to keep things in, that you can also write it down or you could just say it. And that's what I learned about poetry.
I learned a lot. I learned how to connect on a different level with my senses and understand poetry better.
I'ma stop taking everything out on somebody and just write it inside of a poetry.
And we gained an interest in the medium of audio and how we can use audio to create art.
I learned the mic, I learned how it works, and also I might study recording.
And we got to interact with spoken word artists.
What was it like hearing another poet share?
It was moving and relatable.
Hearing from Israel and Brittany made me understand them and look at their situation differently. I actually feel like I can connect with them on a different level than most people because of what they said in their poetry. Not a lot of people look at things the way that they do, and because they express that through poetry, it's easier to understand.
I'm much better at writing than I thought I was, and that maybe there might be more than one poet in my family.
Getting through the COVID-19 pandemic was a challenge, to say the least. And these workshops have gave us an opportunity to express ourselves in a new way. We want to thank you, our listeners, for joining us on this journey. You've been listening to As Loud as I Want. As Loud as I Want is brought to you by Coastal Youth Media and Community CPR. This workshop and podcast is funded in part by a grant from South Arts in partnership with the National Endowment for the Arts, with additional support from North Carolina Local News Lab and the Working Narratives Production and Education Fund. Learn more about our work and other audio productions at www.shoresize.org. That is shoresize.org. Thanks for listening.